So, the Civil War ends in 1865. The fighting's over, right? Well, not exactly. A new kind of battle was just getting started. And this one wasn't with armies and cannons. It was a battle of ideas, a fight for the very soul of America. So today, we're going to dive into the three competing visions, the three blueprints for what this new America was supposed to look like.
I mean, think about it for a second. What comes next after a civil war? It's just a massive, overwhelming question. The United States was, completely shattered. How do you even begin to rebuild a country that's been torn apart by 4 years of just brutal conflict? And what do you do with millions of citizens who just tried to leave? And maybe the biggest question of all, what is the place of 4 million newly freed African Americans in this remade nation?
So this whole monumental task got a name: Reconstruction. On the surface, it was about rebuilding the devastated South and, bringing the former Confederate states back into the fold. But really, at its heart, was that critical question: what are the rights, what is the status of millions of formerly enslaved people? Now, everybody agreed something had to be done. But the debate over how to do it, that would spark one of the most intense political fights in all of American history.
Okay, so let's look at the first blueprint. And it comes from the man who won the war himself, President Abraham Lincoln. For him, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing the South. His whole vision was about healing, about unity. It was all driven by one thing: preserving the nation no matter what.
And what's really key to understanding Lincoln's plan is his focus on two things: speed and mercy. His number one goal was just to stitch the country back together as quickly as possible. He figured that a harsh, punishing peace would just create more bitterness, more resentment down the line. So his approach was just pure pragmatism. Let's encourage loyalty and just move forward. Fast.
You can really see how lenient he was when you look at the mechanics of his plan. It was called the 10% plan. All it took was for just 10% of a state's voters from back in 1860 to swear an oath of loyalty to the U.S. Then the state had to officially accept the end of slavery. And that's it. They were back in the Union. It was a really, really low bar, and it was designed that way on purpose to make coming back as easy as possible.
But of course, history had other plans. This whole vision of a merciful peace, it was never really put to the test. Lincoln was assassinated in April 1865, just days after the war ended, and his death created this massive power vacuum. Suddenly, the entire future of Reconstruction was thrown into complete chaos. And who steps into that vacuum? Vice President Andrew Johnson. Now, Johnson was a really interesting figure. He was a Southerner, but he'd stayed loyal to the Union. You might think he'd follow Lincoln's lead, but his ideas were, they were starkly different. He was a big believer in states' rights, and he wasn't really looking to build a new America. It seemed like he just wanted to restore the old one, just, without the slavery part.
And what's pretty wild is that his plan was, in some ways, even more lenient than Lincoln's was, especially when it came to the old Southern elite, the former Confederate leaders. He just started handing out thousands of pardons, which let them regain power almost immediately. Sure, he made the states ratify the 13th Amendment to end slavery, but honestly, that was about as far as he was willing to push things.
And right here, this is the absolute heart of the conflict that's about to explode. Johnson was completely opposed to the federal government getting involved in protecting the civil rights of African Americans. He just didn't think it was their job. And so, under his watch, Southern states started passing these things called black codes. These were laws that basically made it illegal for black people to own property or conduct business or even move around freely. Let's be real, it was pretty much slavery by another name, all designed to control the lives and labor of the newly freed population.
Well, as you can imagine, this absolutely infuriated a lot of people in Congress. And that brings us to our third, and by far the most revolutionary, blueprint for America. These were the radical Republicans. And for them, Reconstruction wasn't just about rebuilding some roads and bridges. No, they saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime chance for a genuine, federally enforced moral revolution in American society.
You couldn't get more different from Johnson's plan. Their goals were the complete opposite. They were convinced that federal power had to be used to protect the rights of formerly enslaved people. It had to be used to punish former Confederate leaders and keep them from power, and it had to be used to fundamentally reshape Southern society from the ground up. This wasn't about restoration. This was about total transformation.
And you know what? They weren't just talking a big game. They acted on it. They passed absolutely sweeping legislation. Things like the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the legendary 14th Amendment. They literally wrote birthright citizenship and equal protection under the law right into the Constitution. But these were incredibly bold moves, and it put them on a direct collision course with President Johnson. The stage was set for an epic showdown.
So yeah, there you have it.
The perfect setup for an unbelievable political clash. You've got a president who's dead set on restoring the Old South, squaring off against a Congress that's just as determined to build a brand new one.
And what happened next was basically a legislative war. Congress would pass these major Reconstruction bills, and Johnson would immediately use his presidential veto to kill them. But here's the thing. The radical Republicans had the votes. They had a supermajority. So, for the first time in American history, Congress just started overriding his vetoes one after another. They were turning Johnson's no into the law of the land anyway.
And the conflict just kept escalating. It got more and more dramatic. In '66, they steamrolled his veto on the Civil Rights Act. By '67, they went even further and passed the Reconstruction Acts. This basically put the entire South under military rule to make sure their new laws were actually enforced. And then came the final break. In 1868, the House of Representatives took the absolutely extraordinary step of impeaching President Johnson. Now get this, the Senate ultimately failed to convict him and remove him from office by a single vote. It was that close. But in the end, it didn't really matter. The whole impeachment process completely shattered his political power. He was a lame duck. From that point forward, it was Congress, and specifically the radical Republicans, who were firmly in the driver's seat of Reconstruction. So let's just recap, because when you lay it all out side by side, you can really see these three competing blueprints so clearly. First, you had Lincoln's plan, all about quick reconciliation. Then you had Johnson's plan, which was all about restoring the old Southern order. And finally, the radical Republican plan, which pushed for a total transformation of the South, enforced by federal power. I mean, we're talking about three profoundly different visions for what America was supposed to become.
And that really brings us to the final and maybe most crucial point of all this. The battle for Reconstruction officially ended in 1877, but the questions at its heart, they never, ever went away. Who gets to be a citizen? What is the role of the federal government in protecting our rights? What does equality really mean? Just think about it. These are the exact same questions we are still debating, still fighting over today. And that just goes to show you how much this period, all those years ago, continues to shape the American experiment.